Welcome to this episode of I don't even remember the name of our podcast. It's two old guys working it all out.
Yep.
Two middle-aged guys.
Middle-aged.
Yeah,
old.
we're not that old. Two middle-aged guys working it all out. It's a long title, people. I'm sorry. I should probably commit that to memory more than I have. Two middle-aged guys try to work it all out. Two middle-aged guys try to work it all out. Two middle-aged guys try to work it all out. Here I am today with you. I'm Chris, and I'm here with my good friend
David, or Dave.
Yeah, I still remember when we were little kids, and I don't know, I think every group of little kids has this conversation about making fun of people's middle names. And we were just going in a circle, and everybody would tell what their middle name was, and we would just rip it to shreds. And I just could not wait to get to me, because they got to me and it's like, "What's your middle name?" And I'm like, "David."
Oh, and I'm right there.
Yeah.
Single tear. Mocking my name.
But that was many years ago.
That was. My middle name is so many people's, is my dad's first name. And so I, would take great offense if you made fun of my dad's first name.
I swear I will not do that. But anyway, we've got a great episode for you today. We're working some more stuff out, trying to figure things out as we go. And we got a great topic today, which is 3 books that influenced us. And we kind of talked about this a little bit beforehand, and we agreed that there were a couple of ground rules. We could not use a religious text, because if one of us did and one of us didn't, that would just look horrible.
Yes.
So
we'd get into this thing, we'd go back and forth. You'd be like, well, my favorite is the book of Genesis. Well, no, I'm going to one-up you, and my favorite is Revelation. This would...
No.
We would end up just covering the Bible, the Book of Mormon, right? And you would never get anywhere. So I think we just blanket say that the foundational texts of our faiths are, without a doubt, the most important written works. But it's almost dismissive to call them books, right?
No, it's scripture.
It's scripture.
It's a different category.
It is, right? So we're getting that out of the way.
Exactly. So these are three secular, if you want to label them, 3 books that meant a lot to us growing up, that affected our lives, and we're going to go through that. But first, I think Dave's got something for us to talk about.
Yeah, just a little bit of news. So I'm sure everybody has been following what's going on with DC, right? So, Marvel for years, we have the MCU, they've got phases and, this track record, all these movies, don't even know how many of them are. There's so many at this point that I've forgotten as much about the MCU as I can remember, where DC, unfortunately, has not had that level of success. False starts, misdirection, things that don't connect, continuity. It's a mess. And I don't know. I didn't ask you this. Did you see Black Adam last year?
I did not see Black Adam.
Right, so Black Adam. So I'm not going to spoil anything here. I think it's been long enough that if you kind of brought it on yourself. But Black Adam was a pretty big deal. Dwayne Johnson has been talking about making this movie for 50 years.
Yeah.
Talking about since he was like a first grader. I don't know how long. But one of the big deals in the movie was that it had Superman in it. Henry Cavill showed up at the end, post-credits teaser as Superman. And everyone thought, okay, Superman, DC, it's a mess, but at the very least, we've got a Superman. It's the same Superman we had before. There was some level of consistency, whether you like him or not. I have my own opinions about it. We'll get to that. But then right after that, James Gunn and Peter Safran, I think I'm saying his name right, anyway, they took over the DCU. They became the Kevin Feige, or another name I can't pronounce.
I think it's Feige.
Feige, right? Yeah. Okay, well, I got it totally wrong. They became, that sort of, principal creative driver for DC. And they're kind of announcing what's in and what's out. And what we're finding is most is out. And one of the big things that is out is just after bringing him back, Henry Cavill is out as Superman. So we finally got a piece of news about what is going to be replacing that. So there was been very little trickles of information, but we've learned a few things, right? So one of the things that was pretty clear up front is James Gunn is writing it. James Gunn is directing it. Has not yet been casted. But 3 points that have come out that I wanted to talk about, get your opinion, are that it is going to not be an origin story, but it will be a young Superman at the start of his career. So maybe thinking like a year 2 type thing, right? And that it will also deal with the dynamic of Clark Kent raised by a farm boy, or raised as a farm boy, parents in Kansas, but also having this this powerful Kryptonian heritage, and family were scientists and rulers and all that, and sort of that that tension there in his pasts. So I wanted to kind of bring this up and see if that kind of get your opinion on that, because that is the first bit of news. It is fairly big news, and I wanted to see what you thought of that. What do you think about Cavill being in and out? Are you happy? Are you sad? And that those 3 pieces of information, is it that big of a deal? Does it feel like this is groundbreaking to you, or does it feel kind of like more of the same? Tell me what you think about that.
Okay, well, it definitely feels more of the same to me. I'll address the Cavill situation first by saying I am not a fan of Man of Steel. And what was the second Superman? What did they call it?
Batman vs Superman.
Was that the second
Dawn
Superman
of Justice? That was the second.
Did they do
anything.
Did they do another lone Superman title?
They
Or
did not.
I'm completely made up a whole movie in my head. Okay, so I'm not a fan of Man of Steel. And honestly, movie-wise, I'm not a fan of much that DC has done. I've been pretty sad about it. So I'm not a fan of Man of Steel, but I do like Henry Cavill. I liked him as Superman.
Looks like he walked off the page.
Yes, and he seems like a super cool dude.
He does.
And it breaks my heart that he lost Superman and lost The Witcher at the same time.
Yep.
And the other thing that keeps coming to my mind with this new quote-unquote take on Superman is how much I liked Kevin Costner in Man of Steel.
Yes.
As Pa Kent, amazing. And that James Gunn is not going to go back to Kevin Costner.
He's not.
That's old situation. He's going to create his own new situation, and that hurts me a little bit, because if that's what they're choosing to focus on, the relationship between the two fathers, man, that was the best Pa Kent we've ever seen on screen, was Kevin Costner.
Yes, it was.
And we're not going to get that. But the other thing that really confuses me about
I'll pause it right there.
Sure.
Because you had a great Pa Kent. You had a really good Kryptonian daddy.
Oh,
too.
you did. Russell Crowe.
Crowe, right?
Yeah,
and you had Marlon Brando before in the Salkins, whatever, that 70s tragedy, and I make no apologies for despising those movies. I did like the casting.
Even the first one?
Superman
the
especially the first one. That
really?
is a joke. You had Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor. Okay, great actor. An interesting character, not my favorite bad guy, and they just made it a joke with Miss Tessmacher and Ned Beatty. It just was. None of it worked for me. The second one was a better film, but not a great film. Terrence Stamp is really great as Zod.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so I have a very soft spot in my heart for Superman the movie, the original 70s one. I think it's brilliant. I think that especially made at a time when there was no template for a comic book movie.
It's true.
It is outstanding. I hold it in very high regard. I like Superman 2. I'm not as hot on it. 3 and 4, we just pretend that never happened. But also, I'm
don't like Nuclear Man?
I do not.
Made from a piece of hair that was holding up a weight or something?
But could still be cut with scissors.
Well, that's right. Yes.
No.
Very awful movie.
3 and 4 went so far off the rails. And I'm the only human on this planet that loved Superman Returns.
You are.
I am.
You're right.
No, I accept that, and it's a shame the things of the whole Kevin Spacey situation. It's hard to watch anything with him in it now.
He was a good Lex Luthor for that universe,
for that moment in time.
Yes, he was.
But I loved that Bryan Singer went after that feeling of Superman the movie. So in my mind, it's Superman the movie, Superman 2, Superman Returns is the true sequel to that series.
It is. Also, let's just be. I think we should just stop right here. You can't talk about Bryan Singer, Kevin Spacey, and going after feelings in the same sentence.
Fair, that's fair.
Very dangerous.
You're
the
right.
FBI may
Singer,
raid this closet and shut down the podcast.
Singer's a problem too. So with all, okay, when I saw Superman Returns in the theater, I dearly loved that movie. Now it is problematic. So
great costume too.
On Ruth. I mean, just
Ralph.
and I think it's Routh, and I thought he was great too. But anyway, we've gone a little bit off track. Let's go back to Henry Cavill. So what I didn't like about Man of Steel was, and what I feel like James Gunn is walking the same path, is to me they're not capturing the essence of Superman, which is the Boy Scout. You know, there is something about modern cinema that we have to destroy our heroes, or we have to give them an edge, or we have to give them some kind of dark underbelly motivation, and I don't get that. To me, that's why DC created Batman. Superman in the comic books is the hero. He is the one that never wavers. He is the one that always is on the side of the right. He's the one that's preaching the good preach. And then you have Bruce Wayne off to the side being like, can you get a load of this guy? I mean, you know, that's the foil.
Using guns in his early, iterations.
To me, that's the foil. That's the Han Solo to Luke Skywalker, you know? And so where Man of Steel went wrong to me was the Superman killed Zod thing, and there was the whole broodingness thing of it going on, which I didn't like. And it sounds like that's exactly what James Gunn liked about it, and that's what he's going for with this new picture. I'm also not a fan of James Gunn. Wasn't impressed with Guardians of the Galaxy. And so there's very little that I'm hearing about the Superman film that has me interested.
So, I share your unpopular opinion about James Gunn largely, right? I think in the right subject matter he fits. I think the Superman is not the right subject matter for him. I think he's more of a farty joke type guy, right? And I'm a little concerned about where this is going. Now, that being said, he might have matured and have more depth than we realize, and it might pull something, really cool off here. I think that they had a great Superman in Cavill, and disappointed that they let that go. It seems very schizophrenic of them to do that just after The Rock bringing him back. When you realize now that was probably more of The Rock trying to will it to happen than it was actually being a real thing.
Yeah,
Cavill was the victim of that a little bit.
And I think that the rejection of Cavill is more of a political statement rather than a statement on talent or acting or the right person.
That is probably true, which is real disappointment because he is a great Superman. I think that the idea that this is somehow new ground. That it's not an origin story, okay, but Man of Steel wasn't. I mean, Superman doesn't have like your traditional origin story. He wasn't bit by the super bug and became Superman. I mean, it's a process, and I think that both Man of Steel and the old '78 Superman or '79, I can't even remember the Donner, they were that maturing and growing up with the Kents. I don't think that that's new ground. I think that the idea of the two fathers, two worlds, that's not new ground either. And Man of Steel was ate up with that.
Yeah.
And it was done effectively because I think I'll give the credit to Kevin Costner, who was, as you said, a fantastic Pa Kent. And Diane Keaton was a great Ma Kent, right? He seemed like he had a stable family, and it felt like a real family. He was dealing with real issues of, we have this alien kid with incredible power, but also this frailty, and the world would not understand. All handled very well. So I don't feel like that's new ground. And the idea that this is early in his career. Well, again, we had that already. So I think that. I think that where they're going to go to differentiate themselves is, I think they're going to go to to a villain that we've not seen before, and we'll probably get something like a Brainiac. We're not going to get a Lex Luthor. We're not going to get a Zod, nor should we, right? These have been beaten up. Lex Luthor has been, I think, Eisenberg ruined whatever was good about Lex Luthor was ruined. Don't need another Zod because I think Michael Shannon was a fantastic Zod. And I like Man of Steel, obviously, probably a lot more than you do. I do agree, though, that Superman and Batman both work better in universes where they exist. They both exist because the world's finest. They play off of each other. But yeah, I'm not. This news. It's interesting that we're starting to get some news, but to me, it feels like he's describing like a more serious Donner Superman or a less serious Zack Snyder Superman, but at the end of the day, it feels like it's just another version of what we've already seen, and probably with not as good of an actor or as good of a costume. Although I do think Christopher Reeves kind of looked like somebody's like fit dad in a pair of pajamas or a Halloween costume.
The costume was very 1970s.
It was.
You got to give him some leeway there. But I will, hearing you kind of give your opinion on that and your take on it, I will go back and clarify something I said, which is I believe you can do a serious take on Superman without the darkness. And I fear that so many people miss that because when they think, we're going to approach this seriously, I think that's where the idea of, he needs to kill Zod came from. Well, let's make it a serious movie. You can take a fantastical character like Superman, ground him in reality, and do a serious film about it without breaking what I feel are just his core attributes of a character and something that has been established for nearly 100 years at this point. So I'm all for a serious take on the subject matter. I think that's what Nolan's Batman films did so well, was approach it seriously. I mean, to me, The Dark Knight is more of like a Godfather sequel than a Batman movie in the way that Nolan approached it. So that's what I want to see. That's what I would love to see in a new Superman movie. And I don't think James Gunn has it in him. To be fair, I'm not a big fan of Zack Snyder either. And the parts of Man of Steel I did like. I was surprised that I liked it because I did not think I would be into this film going into it. But there was quite a bit of it I did enjoy, and then they kind of lost me at the end there. I don't.
You didn't like Superman destroying an entire city?
I wasn't crazy about it. No.
I loved that. I will say I think that they did a really good job of taking that criticism and then turning that into the driver for Batman Superman.
Yeah.
I mean, that was really like, because they did criticize that a ton, and they're in many ways, valid, right? Like, why didn't he try to get him off into space or take him, But then they turned that around, and that made him the reason that Bruce Wayne was afraid of him. I think they may have taken that too far. You can be afraid of something without wanting to murder it in cold blood. But that was, I think, pretty clever.
I will agree with that statement. It was a pretty clever way to launch in to Batman versus Superman. And I won't go into my issues with Batman versus Superman because that's another podcast another day.
Yes.
But yeah, I agree. That was a clever move by the writers. Whoever idea that was, I'll give them
Snyder,
the credit
Goyer. I mean, there was that group.
Yep.
Writing that. But okay, so I think that where we can leave that is probably a lot more to come. But at this point, I don't feel like we will get something new because at a minimum, we're going to get some bad James Gunn humor. And I think that is a guarantee. But I'm not feeling anything groundbreaking. But at the same time, I don't necessarily need something groundbreaking from Superman because, it's got a rich tradition. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to make a deal, and I'll end it on this, about letting go of Cavill because you wanted to do something new and you wanted to go younger, and I get it, I want a little bit younger Superman, then, you better bring something really good if you're going to sacrifice the best thing that DC had going in the cinematic universe, which was the casting of Man of Steel. You better bring it. I'm not sure Gunn's got it. But we we shall see.
Yeah, I completely agree.
All right. So the main topic,
The main
the
topic
thing we're actually here for,
is books, which is exciting because books are one of my favorite things on the planet. And the topic is 3 books that were influential in our lives. And I've been given the task of starting this off, so I will.
Okay, ask a question. Anything about the order that you're going in?
That is a good question. And no.
Okay.
No, I would say no. I picked 3. I could put them in an order real quick, but it might be hard.
Do what your heart says.
All right, I'm going to do what my heart says. This first one that I'm going to go with, I feel like it might be on your list. I think my other 2...
I'm going to say this right now. If there is any crossover between our lists, I will give you $100.
Oh, okay.
There will be no crossover.
No crossover. Okay, all right. Well,
I'm about to be wrong. I just declared it with
My-
too much energy.
my first, most influential book in my life was 1984 by George Orwell. And that book, I read it when I was too young. I will freely admit that. I was too impressionable. I was in junior high school when I read 1984. And it really gave me an unhealthy distrust of anyone in power. It gave me an unhealthy distrust of politics. It formed some maybe healthy paranoia in me. And I have been kind of obsessed with dystopian fiction, with totalitarian governments, and with the concept of a slippery slope ever since. And so whenever I see anything in the news that even remotely resembles anything from 1984, I'm blaring it from the hilltops saying we can't let this happen. And I would freely vote for anyone, no matter what their stance or their party was, if they held up a copy of 1984 and said, I read this annually. I'd be like, that is the candidate for me. And it's such a stark realization of what could have happened. And even reading it as such a young person, I grasped onto that. And I knew very well that Orwell was writing it as an allegory for Mussolini, for Hitler, for World War II, for all those different totalitarian governments that did exist at one point and were just thankfully defeated. And if they hadn't been defeated, we would have posters of Big Brother up on our walls now, and we would have TVs that spied on us while we tried to record our thoughts in a diary. I believe
TV
this.
spy on us for totally different reasons
That's
now.
exactly true. Yeah,
Because
we let them
invite
spy
them.
on
Yeah,
us.
like-
Yeah, it's different. I'm okay with that. No, but one of the things we talked about. And if you didn't do this, we can edit this out. But bringing excerpts from the books.
I
with
brought
us.
for one.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I brought excerpts for all 3, so you're going to have to suffer through that. But this excerpt from 1984, I will read it in my best audiobook voice. Now I will tell you the answer to my question. It is this. The party seeks power entirely for its own sake. We are not interested in the good of others. We are interested solely in power, pure power. What pure power means you will understand presently. We are different from the oligarchies of the past in that we know what we are doing. All the others, even those who resembled ourselves, were cowards and hypocrites. The German Nazis and the Russian communists came very close to us in their methods, but they never had the courage to recognize their own motives. They pretended, perhaps they even believed, that they had seized power unwillingly and for a limited time, and that just around the corner there lay a paradise where human beings would be free and equal. We are not like that. We know that no one ever seizes power with the intention of relinquishing it. Power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. The object of persecution is persecution. The object of torture is torture. The object of power is power. Now you begin to understand me.
That's a great excerpt. I remember that. 1984, not on my list.
Okay, I thought
However, it was. I always make like my little bonus list, like an honorable mention. That was on my honorable mention list
All right.
for similar reasons, and that I also read it young. I was in 9th grade when I read it, so you and I probably read it. In fact, we may have read it at the same time,
Probably.
and like talked about it as we read it. And it's on my list because of it was like the first big boy adult novel that I read, or novella, or whatever you want to call it. And it too instilled a bit of fear, paranoia in me. Mostly the fear of a naked John Hurt from
Well,
the
that's
movie,
yeah.
which is the most terrifying thing. But it big impact on me. Just very similar reasons. Totally view it through the same, I think, lens that you did. Impactful at the time. I think I did read Animal Farm before 1984. I think Animal Farm allegorically is fine, not nearly as good in terms of prose or its lasting impact. But it was not, didn't make my list, but definitely up there. It is a powerful book. I think it and Brave New World get compared to each other.
And I don't feel that they should.
Well, Brave New World is a terrible book, but I think that Huxley actually had the hook right, and that people will be are much more likely to be enslaved by sort of the things that make them happy, and substance and conscious alterations, whereas the things that make them miserable will eventually it might break them, but a lot of broken people are pretty worthless. So I think that they both had I think that their disagreements, and I think they even had wrote letters to each other and then things that even discussed their different worldviews, that they both believed that power was the same, was that thing that was driving both of theirs, but they had different ideas about what that would look like. Ultimately, I think that in the end it's going to look like a combination of those two things are what driving this sort of oppressive totalitarianism, but they're making us just happy enough and overfeeding us, as opposed to making us elated as they would in Brave New World, and starving us in 1984. So but yeah, in agreement. And Orwell, generally speaking, I think is a pretty good writer, though he mostly wrote articles and essays and things
Essays
like that.
and a lot of travelogues.
Yeah.
The only two novels he wrote are Animal Farm and 1984. Yeah.
And I've read other stuff. I don't remember a thing, because it just didn't, it wasn't about the guy watching me through the TV screen, so it wasn't interesting enough to my teenage brain, and so I moved on. But I'm not surprised that's on your list. You probably are a little surprised it didn't make mine.
I thought I had that $100, but that's okay.
Well, we'll see. We'll see where it goes from here. I've got, these are not going to be choices you would expect. So I'm going to hit you with my first one here. It is a book. It is a science fiction book called The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell, who is an anthropologist. Have you heard of this book?
I've read the book.
Have you read this?
I have read the
my
book.
goodness. Most people I talk to have not read this book.
Yeah.
I love this book. Obviously, it's on this list. It's one of my two favorite books. It is a first contact book. It is a book about belief and the challenge of belief, and meeting a very foreign culture. This book did not have to be about different worlds. It didn't have to be about aliens. This could have been written in the context of a first contact on our own planet, a country, English visitors or Spanish visitors going to an island, exotic and with a totally different society set up, and it would have worked just the same. But it's in these sort of mid-level sci-fi trappings. But basically, as for our listeners out there, it is a story of the discovery of life. It's set in the year 2019. This was written in. I'm looking at my notes here, and I don't see actually when it was written. 2008. It's set in 2019, and there is a signal received from Alpha Centauri. I believe it's Proxima b. I think it's the planet that they think might be in the Goldilocks zone, but a radio signal, and it's broken down, and they realize that it's music, it's singing, and there's intelligent life out there. So the the organization in this version of the future, which is now our past, which I'd love to talk about, that has the resources, the ability, the organizational clout, and the will to carry off this sort of mission to the stars is the Catholic Church. And so they send a missionary group, right, head by different leaders in the church, a linguist, a priest, Sandoz, who goes and leads this mission to this foreign planet. And the book is told with this jumping around in time. When you meet our character, it's after the first contact. A horrible tragedy has befallen him, a set of tragedies that does not become really clear in scope of how bad, how impactful it is to him until the book lays out. It's still kind of like it's still kind of hard to wrap your brain around, because sometimes it's just as bad as it could possibly be, and having read it, you know what it is, but you wonder, like partway through it, you're like, man, are they going to be able to pay this off? Are the things that happen to this character in this foreign world going to be as bad? And yes, they are. But it goes through these missionaries on a mission, going out, serving mankind, serving God, and things going really bad. And it recognizes that good intentions, that the first contact scenario is fraught with peril, that not every mission trip has a happy ending, no matter how good your intentions are, that mission trips can go really, really bad. You could be serving God, you can be serving a more noble purpose, and it can all fall apart. And what is your reaction to that? And it goes through that. There's two sides of it. It has this exploration of Mary Doria Russell is a anthropologist, so it has this exploration of these foreign worlds and foreign cultures and what that looks like, and the dynamic, and really how we could totally misunderstand that as humans, bringing our views and even our political views, and we think we understand the East and the West, and we understand all these different dynamics, but how totally different commerce, culture, trade could look in a foreign world, how we could totally misunderstand that and really screw up a first contact experience. And then what that does, if you put highly religious, intelligent, all of these folks that are on this mission, they're have doctorates, our lead, not the lead priest, but the Jesuit who sent there is the linguist, is a genius. I believe he does have a doctorate in languages.
I thought the linguist was the main character, the main priest.
Yes, he is the linguist. Yes.
Okay.
But
yes.
These are not dumb people, right? But everything goes terribly bad for them. They have grounded faith. But that is because things go so bad, they question everything. And he was the main, Sandoz, I believe, is the character's name. Emilio Sandoz, if I remember correctly. But there's it is a fantastic, challenging story. It's got the sci-fi trappings. She is not a scientist. But she did actually get some things with, near light speed travel and time dilation. It all, checks out. It gives you just enough detail to be plausible, but it doesn't go all Chris Nolan on you, and you got to get your pad and your paper out and figure out this word problem.
Matthew McConaughey floats in. All right, I'm behind the bookshelf with my priests, and
but it's also not hand waving it away. It deals with and then we were in space, right? It doesn't treat it like that silly. But it doesn't get bogged down in the details to the point where you lose sight of the actual point of the story, which is if dealing with the first contact, and what does that do, meeting aliens, meeting this new culture, what does that do to your faith? And these characters step into it with this is going to be a faith building exercise, and it goes very different. And there's a full arc, and I'm not going to, it's other than to say I won't give anything away, then say it's extremely satisfying, thought-provoking. It does not go places you would expect. If it goes somewhere you would expect, probably you should see a physician and get yourself checked, because there may be something very wrong with you. There's a sequel to it, Children of God. I don't know if you've read that.
I have not read the sequel.
Not as good, but very good. And when you say it's not as good as the best book you've ever read, that makes sense. Highly recommend. Very readable. And it's a fast read. I mean, you could tear through it in a couple good long evenings. I love the book.
So I will say, number one, you did an excellent job summarizing your book, which I failed completely on mine. So
everybody knows what 1984 is.
I would hope so. If not, go to Wikipedia. But I had some issues with this book, and I will say that it is a book that I read, 7-8 years ago, and it still stays with me. I mean, there are some images that exist in this book that I've never forgotten. Yep. So kudos to the author for being able to do that.
The hands.
Oh,
the
yes.
Singing.
The hands in particular.
and you're reading that, you're like, the hands. Yeah. Or listening, and you're like, no, trust me, you read the book and you realize.
That vision will never leave my brain. Here's what I struggled with. When through most of the book, the main priest is essentially going through an inquisition of the Catholic Church, and they accuse him of sinning. I mean, just like they're not pulling any punches. They are saying, you have sinned in this circumstance, and I never could understand what their motivation was for that, because in my reading of the book, everything was done to him.
He was a victim.
Yes, and he was never culpable. He was never agreeable, and so that really troubled me reading the book.
Isn't it hard to talk about this without giving too much away? Because anybody who's listening to this is going, "What the heck aren't they talking about?" I think that's a fair point. I think that the construction of the book and his reluctance to talk about what happened, but there's also this physical evidence and things that it's like they're trying to get the story. He won't tell them the story. There's shame. What's going on here?
And I understand the shame angle, but when it's finally revealed, as a reader, I'm like, dude, that's not you.
Just say
that's
it.
not your fault. Yeah. And so that in a lot of ways really turned me off to the book, because you do get this very well written, very well constructed build, and then when I got that moment, I was like, oh, we've had it wrong about this guy for the last 400 pages, and so I didn't connect with it as well because of that. And then I thought a lot of the questionings of faith, it was like, wait a second, if I had been in this priest's shoes, I would not be feeling guilt. I might be dealing with why God would this happen to me. I might be dealing with certainly PTSD,
which he was.
Yes.
And there was anger.
But the guilt really struck me. I felt like, man, he's taking on a lot of guilt that isn't his to take on.
Very interesting. Yeah. And I think the second book actually kind of it deals with that. I think that he was just psychologically damaged to the point where he didn't know what to do. And also the title, right? The Sparrow. It comes from Matthew 10:19. That his eyes is on the sparrow, and the way I connected that, and I don't remember if it's called that explicitly, is if your eye is on the sparrow, why did these awful things happen when we went out on the ultimate missionary trip?
Yeah,
across the stars in your name. And what I like about the book is it doesn't resolve that. It doesn't resolve any of that, right? He resolves it on his own through both this book and into the sequel. But he is, but it doesn't spoon feed you any of these answers. And interestingly enough, the author is not a Catholic. I believe she is because I did a little reading on her background because I was kind of curious what I think she was a secular Jew, but she gets a lot of this really core denominational things around Catholicism, and quite
Yes.
right.
And as a thesis on why do bad things happen to good people?
Yes.
It's very well done. If that's a question that's on your mind, then this is worth it to read, because it addresses that in a very vivid way, I would say.
Well, I love the book. Strongly recommend you check out the sequel, because I think it might. It's no less depressing.
Oh, well.
In fact, in many ways, to set up a sequel to this, you realize, wait, some things have got to happen that aren't good. They beat up on Sandoz some more.
Oh, good grief.
Yeah, I know, poor guy. But it's just as well written, just as thoughtful.
Interesting. I don't know that I'm going to rush out and pick that one up. But what's the author's name again?
Mary Doria Russell.
Are you aware of the books that she's written about Doc Holliday?
Doc Holliday. I have not. I'm aware of them. I've not read any of them.
So for our listeners out there, I happen to know that Dave and I are huge fans of the movie Tombstone.
Tombstone, of course.
And she wrote 2 novels about Doc Holliday.
Yes, Doc and...
I don't remember the name.
Doc was one of them.
Yes.
And then I can't remember the other one.
I can't. Anyway, worth your time. Good books.
All right. I will. I obviously think she's a good author. Since Doc Holliday was greatly influenced by Val Kilmer, and we both. That was a joke, by the way. Pretty sure Val Kilmer was born after Doc Holliday, but
it's Val Kilmer.
Really lame.
It's Val Kilmer. You never know.
You never know. But I might check that out. If I would be so disappointed though to learn that he was nothing like this character in Tombstone.
Oh, but the great thing is you're reading it, so you can read it with Doc's voice,
spinning the cup around, and I'll make you famous. And
I love it.
Anyway. All right. Anyway, we need to move on.
Yes, but
that's interesting. I'm glad you've read the book. I wasn't expecting that. I will say this: everyone that I've ever recommended the book to that's read it has not liked it.
Oh, really?
Yes. So,
but the fact that you found value in it, I think that's meaningful, and especially hearing you talk about it, I can understand the value that you found in it. Even though there were parts of it that I was like, this isn't clicking for me. The fact that it clicked for you is fantastic. All right, my next influential book is a bit of a cheat, so I apologize for that. But I picked The Essential Ellison by Harlan Ellison. And I call it a bit of a cheat because The Essential Ellison is a compilation of 75 years worth of the man's short stories. And for anybody who has not had the pleasure of listening to Mr. Ellison in an interview or talk about something, you're missing out. I recommend you go to YouTube and type in Harlan Ellison and just get lost for a couple of hours, because this guy was a character of characters. He started writing short fiction in the late 40s, early 50s, and just wrote story after story after story, something to the tune of like 18,000 short stories. And what I really think is interesting about him is out of his career, he only wrote 2 novels. Everything else was a short story. And he built an entire career out of short story, which is why I call him America's greatest short story writer, bar none. And I'll fight people on that one. I don't think anybody has ever done for the short story what Harlan Ellison did.
Well, I'm going to throw somebody at you a little bit. We'll have an argument between the two of ours.
Specifically about short stories.
Well, this was... I won't get into it, but the person that I'm going to bring up next also was a prolific short story writer.
Okay. So. All right. Well, we'll see. So some of the stories of note of Harlan Ellison that you will find in The Essential Ellison that you may be familiar with is I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, a seminal story of his. Jeff D is 5, one of the saddest stories I've ever read in my life. And of course, Repent Harlequin Said the TikTok Man, which is probably his most famous story. When he passed away a few years ago, every single obituary or article that you read was always like, the author of Repent Harlequin Said the TikTok Man, which is fine. It's a great story, but that's very limiting just to call him the author of Repent Harlequin. Now, the reason that this influenced me so much is I spent the better part of half of my life trying to become a published author, and it is mostly because of Harlan Ellison. I was probably 12 or 13 when I was introduced to Harlan Ellison, and I saw him hosting a TV show of all things. And during the hosting process, he talked about the fact that he was a writer, and I was just so taken with this figure on television that I immediately, the next time we were at the bookstore, I immediately started looking for Harlan Ellison
What
books.
TV show was this? Was this a little prisoner intro, outro?
It was.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Because that's the only thing I recall him.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
so what Dave's talking about is the Sci-Fi Channel when it first was born and became a thing.
Before they added any Y's.
Yes.
When it was just I's.
That's right. The SCI-FI channel. They did a marathon of a show from the 60s called The Prisoner, which I guarantee you will be a topic of an episode down the road. But because we were both obsessed with science fiction and the Sci-Fi Channel appeared, we watched this show that we'd never heard of before called The Prisoner, and it was hosted by Harlan Ellison. And there was just, he's such a charismatic individual. That I was immediately taken by this person and went to a bookstore, and this was back in the days before Barnes and Noble. It was a Walden book, if that means anything to anybody. And my father took me there, and I'm looking in the shelves for Ellison. Cannot find anything except for this huge Essential Ellison retrospective. And it was way beyond my ability to afford because it is a nearly 1,500 page paperback tome. And I was looking through it, and I was really sad because I couldn't get it, and I was very interested in this guy's writing. And my dad was like, "Oh, what have you got there?" And so I explained the whole story to him, and my dad bought it for me. Because my parents kind of had this unspoken rule that, well, if the boy wants a book, he gets a book. And I've carried that forward with my children, and sometimes they have milked that. But you know what? I really believe in the importance of books, so that was fine with me. But my dad bought this book for me on the condition that he wanted to read some of it too. So we kind of passed it back and forth, reading a short story here and a short story there. And believe me, not everyone is a home run, but he is consistent. He is an amazing writer, and he was an inspiration as I would try to write short stories, and then later on in my life would try to write novels. It meant a lot to me. And he has a very unique way of writing. He's very much one of these people that are like, you got to know the rules if you're going to break the rules, and he breaks the rules, but by golly, he's earned it. He's earned the right. So here's a little excerpt from Repent Harlequin Said the TikTok Man. And so it goes, and so it goes, and so it goes, and so it goes, goes. Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. And one day we no longer let time serve us, we serve time. And we are slaves of the schedule, worshippers of the sun's passing, bound into a life predicated upon restrictions because the system will not function if we don't keep the schedule tight. And the fact that some of those aren't even sentences, but he weaves them together. There's another passage that I won't read, but it's from Repent Harlequin, where he goes on for a page about all the different jelly beans that rain down on the city because of something that the Harlequin has done. And, if you're in a creative writing class, the last thing they're going to tell you is, why don't you spend this page describing all the different jelly beans that fall? But it was music to my young man's ears. And I would read these stories, and me as a human being is probably as far from Harlan Ellison as a human being as you can get. He had an anger problem, to be sure, but
very cantankerous.
Oh, a very cantankerous man, and known for it.
understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And would tell stories of selling a story to a magazine, and the magazine wouldn't be able to pay it, so he would break into the office and steal a typewriter that he could pawn it, and he would get the money for his story that way. Just these audacious stories where in some of his books, the introduction that he writes to the books are better than the stories that are in them, just because he's such an amazing character of Americana. So if you don't know who Harlan Ellison is, I recommend you seek him out. Thanks to the brilliance of ebooks, you can get his entire library now, which when I was growing up, it didn't exist. And I would be lucky maybe every year or two to find an old paperback in an old used bookstore. And so I just would collect and scrounge for these things. And I probably have the largest Harlan Ellison collection in the Midwest, just because I've been collecting for so many years.
I suspect that people who aren't familiar with, maybe they know the name, but think I've never read or I've never experienced any of his works, have through Star Trek and don't
Yes.
even realize it.
Yeah, so one of the things that he's also known for is he is the writer of the Star Trek episode The City on the Edge of Forever,
There you go.
which is voted in every single poll as the single greatest episode of Star Trek. And I think rightfully so. It's a darn good episode. It's a brilliantly written script. And even the cast, if they're ever asked what was your favorite episode of Trek, it's always City on the Edge of Forever. And but he's written so much more than that, and he's written short stories, and he's written screenplays, and even the two novels that he tackled, he did it deftly. It's not like the man couldn't write a novel. It's just his mode of expression was the short story. And it's one of those weird situations where I admire the man who wrote the book, maybe in some cases more than the book, but it was a very influential thing with me growing up, and I still have that copy of The Essential Ellison on my shelf, and it's dog-eared to death, and but it's a glorious thing.
Well, so I've admittedly never read any Harlan Ellison. I am familiar with him because of Sitting on the Edge of Forever, which is a brilliant episode of Star Trek. I don't know if it's my favorite. But I'm not a huge Star Trek guy, but I think that it and Amok Time are the ones that are Mock Time, that did come to mind. Very, though, familiar with his the cantankerous little bits before The Prisoner. I thought they were interesting. I was just like, who is this angry old guy, and why is he introducing this show that I like very much? But I didn't understand, at the time this stuff was all new. We were learning about, what The Prisoner was, and I hadn't really read a real book at that time. So, but I didn't get into him from there. But I knew he had an impact on you. At some point, I will read some of this. But I think what I'm more familiar with, obviously, the Star Trek though, is the stories about Harlan Ellison as opposed to Harlan Ellison's stories, right? Just
Sure.
Like how angry he was, and how every bit of the character that he wanted you to think he was, he actually was, right? Like it wasn't just, if it was an act, it was a great lifelong act that he had he was very committed to.
A Kaufman-esque act, if it
right.
was.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, he was a very angry man, and he himself was like, I've never forgotten a grudge. If you've wronged me, you're on my list forever. And that's where he and I start to part a little bit. I think maybe, forgive and forget is maybe a good way to live. But hey, he made it into his late 80s before he finally passed away. And he will probably, unfortunately, be one of the many sci-fi authors that kind of does pass into obscurity. His heyday were the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so even when I was introduced to him and started following him, there wasn't a huge dearth of new material. But those stories, man, if you love pulp science fiction, he's king.
Well, so I'm gonna throw someone out that I think will compete with that. But before I do, I want to ask a question.
Sure.
We're at the midpoint. Well, we're talking about books. What is a book that you have gotten the farthest in, but you hated so much that you didn't finish it? But you remember it made an impact on you, maybe because you hated it so much. And let's say that, a third or halfway, that's kind of far enough that it counts. I'm just kind of curious if there's one that you can recall.
Oh my goodness, that I've hated. I do have an inner compulsion to finish things that I start.
I'm the same way.
And I actually, that's something I've been trying to work on lately, because my life is finite, and wouldn't it be better to spend my time on things I'm enjoying versus things I'm not? So a book that I've hated, I can immediately think of one that I hated but I finished.
All right, well, let's go with that one then.
1Q84. By Murakami. He's a Japanese author. Murakami is his last name. I'm blanking on his first name. But it was an extremely long novel, 1,200 pages or so. And it was strange in the sense that I did not enjoy it at all. I pressed forward, but it has lingered in my mind. And it's one of those things that will pop up in very odd circumstances. And I'll be like, why am I thinking of that book that I did not enjoy at all? Anyway, so, yeah, but I'm trying to think of when I stopped, and I'm not coming up with one.
Well, I'll toss mine out there. So I asked.
Sure.
Ready Player One by Ernest Cline.
Really
I despise that book. I got halfway through it,
interesting.
and I don't like. I think he's a smug, talentless. Somehow has 3 best-selling books, but in a movie
Yeah.
adaptation by Spielberg, but
So
awful.
I enjoyed Ready Player One, but it was a pulpy read. I wasn't taking it seriously, and for me, it was such a quick read that I don't know if I could have like consciously had the
Put it
thought to
down.
put it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it was very short, very succinct, very fast paced, and I only read it once, but I remembered enjoying it, and I enjoyed Spielberg's film. But I thought, oh well, I liked Ready Player One, so I'm gonna like the rest of this guy's library as well, and that I cannot say that I did.
Did you read Armada?
I read Armada, not impressed. I've seen The Last Starfighter. Thank you very much.
Yes. It's amazing how it's this. It's just a worse version of an already middling
Yes.
story,
Completely agree.
and how it got published.
I don't know. I mean, Ready Player One did amazing.
That's
business.
how it got published,
Yeah.
right? But
Now, and Ready Player Two, I did not read.
yeah.
So
I did not read. I am familiar with Armada and RP2 because of a podcast I listened to that talked about them. But I got halfway through Ready Player One, and like, this is just referencing 80s stuff is not a story. But I was curious. I am
It
the
worked.
same way in that once I have to make that decision very quick, right? Like 20 or 30 pages, and if I haven't made the decision to put it down, I'm gonna finish it. Just because I
yeah, there are some media.
invested.
There are some media in my life that I've experienced multiple times and still could not say if I like it or not. And so I kind of take that attitude with a lot of things.
Well, all right. So I'm going to hit you with someone that I think might be similar to Ellison, although prolific in short stories, wrote many more novels, and someone. My favorite author. This is my Harlan Ellison,
Okay.
in that I've written almost everything that Philip K. Dick has ever written.
All right.
Almost everything. There's a couple of things. His last work, Valis, I did not finish. It was too depressing. It was a diseased mind, trying to very ill. But he wrote what is tied with The Sparrow as my favorite book, A Scanner Darkly.
Oh, okay. I was wondering which one you were going to pick.
And I love this book, and it is a science fiction dystopian novel, very light on the science. Right, the science fiction-y part is a bit of world building, but it's really he wrote it in. I'm looking at my notes here. Set in 1994, he wrote it. Started writing it in 73, finished it in 77. Very long process of writing. His addiction was so bad. It went through so many iterations and so much heavy editing that his own thoughts on it were that he was not sure it would ever get done, and that it was just a mess. Very humble, right? But I think he probably felt that way about most of the stuff he ever wrote, that he was surprised it got done. But it's a dystopian. It's about in the future a drug called Substance D that is highly addictive and destructive, and it is tearing through the drug culture across America, and in particular in Southern California, where this is set. And it is about a police officer who is investigating this drug and trying to understand the source of the drug, and about this police officer's struggle with identity, with who he is investigating, with whether or not he's losing track of himself through this process, and he is doing surveillance on a group of folks that in one hand he has become he's so deep undercover that he considers them friends, and he's lost himself in this other identity. On the other hand, he clearly hates what they are. And I think it goes back and forth. That's one of the things. He's an unreliable narrator, but it's because he sees so much of himself in them, and he's losing himself, and that becomes a major part of the plot. But it's this investigation of this drug and its destruction of the country and of individuals. But it's really from PKD, Philip K. Dick. It's about himself and about his friends and about what drugs did to his life and where he was at the time of his life. Philip K. Dick, famously the author of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which became sort of kinda Blade Runner, right? I mean, it was the inspiration for what would become Blade Runner, although they're very little in common.
True.
Replicants. The term replicants in some of the character names, Deckard, Beatty, but really they're very different stories. Actually, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is, I think, one of his weaker efforts, in my opinion. I've read it multiple times. I don't think it's all that great. But A Scanner Darkly is this brilliant and sad investigation in this inspection of what happens to an addict's life and to his mind. He wrote it after his wife had left, and he opened his home to, different transients and addicts and all these people coming in and out of his life. And as they're coming in and out of his life, some of them are just dying because they're so deeply addicted and they're falling victim to the real life drugs. So he creates this sort of fictionalized drug, which is a stand-in for all other drugs and all other addictions. The science fiction part is very limited. It's kind of, sort of the big innovations are around surveillance and things to do to keep his identity undercover. The scramble suit, which is a suit he can put on, which makes him unrecognizable. There's some neat stuff about the culture and the economic system where, like, you can't get into a mall without a credit card in this world. You've read this book, right?
I have, yeah.
So, and I love this book. And it's extremely difficult. You see addiction in other people's lives, and this I think, is a very it's an accurate depiction of what addiction is like, and it deals with, addiction is not just you live and then maybe you recover or maybe you die. It's about, there's all kinds of losses: loss of freedom, loss of your will, loss of health, loss of your mind. Maybe you continue to live, maybe you're physically healthy, but mentally you're no longer the same person, or you're no longer in control of any of your faculties. And it deals with that a lot, what recovery is, the process of rehabilitation and what that looks like. And it's not done from this point of view of drugs are great and everybody should do them. If anything, it's a little bit more on the drugs are extremely dangerous. They should be handled with caution, if at all. And it does, I think it describes in one passage what addiction and drugs are like. And it's the only passage that I picked to read. It's very short, and I'll read it. This is a part where our main character is told from the point of view of Fred Arctor, who is this police officer investigator in this sort of hybrid privatized police force, undercover. He is giving a speech to a group of community leaders, like a chamber of commerce of very stiff, straight, non-drug addicted folks, civilian types, but that have no empathy or really no idea of what it's like to live on the other side of the world of the addicted folks. And so this is just a brief part, and I think it captures what addiction is like. He's describing substance D, and he says, D is dumbness and despair, desertion from you, you from your friends from you, everyone from everyone, isolation and loneliness, and hating and suspicion. D is finally death, slow death from the head down. And that is in a handful of sentences and phrases what I would imagine that is like. Absolutely awful. Slow death from the head down, right? Which indicates that dying is not the worst part of it. That that passing out of conscious life into the next it may actually be freedom for some of these that are highly addicted, especially if you read his dedication, his afterthoughts, where he talks about those that acquaintances and friends that died or lost other things. And he says, that their worst crime was just living too close to the edge, and that they didn't deserve what they got, but there was a price to be paid for their lifestyle, for their behaviors. Very non-judgmental. Brilliant book. I love it, and I don't even always... I don't even have a great explanation for it. I just think it's a wonderful bit of character building and world building. I think that the issues of identity, when he starts to lose his identity, are very imaginatively done. I think Philip K. Dick's prose is brilliant and unusual. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice a little bit. I'm not choking up. I'm actually losing my voice a little bit. But and I think that this, unlike some of his other work, if PKD there's a couple real legitimate criticisms. He doesn't have a ton of depth. All of his science stuff is just hand waving, right? He is like, okay, we have a new technology. It's just there. Trust us. But one of his big flaws is he does not write female characters very well. In this story, though, he has a character named Donna, who he writes, I think, extremely well. And I think maybe the editing process, I've got to believe something through the editing process with his editor, who was a female, helped improve that character and really make her a very real, very human character. It wasn't just a foil for his male hero, who wasn't really a hero or a villain. The real villain, it's so complex and interesting, and it doesn't fully make sense until the end. Philip K. Dick is kind of like a sort of a watered down Chris Nolan, right? There's always a little twist, and I think his stuff is brilliant. I love this short story. It's novella or whatever you want to call it, not quite a novel. I also love the movie, which is based on it, which is an animated, sort of animated. What do they call that?
Rotoscope.
Rotoscope. Thank you. And stars Keanu Reeves as Bob Arctor. Absolutely brilliant performance. Great movie. So close to the book too. When people say, what are the closest adaptations, who gets it right? That's the first one that comes out of my mouth is, the changes that it makes are minor and they're necessary for it to work. It's such a brilliant little movie. Great sound. Everything works. Robert Downey Jr., pre-Iron Man, sort of post coming out of it. The guy talking about the guy who knows about addiction and the cost. But before he gets back to, in where he's the biggest star in the world, Iron Man plays this horrible, awful, despicable addict characters out to screw everyone over that's in his life. And it's hilarious. His performance is brilliant and hilarious. And even though he's awful, you still kind of like him. Like most of the characters, like they're pitiful. I love this book. It means a whole lot to me. Like I said, I can't always explain why, other than I've read almost everything Philip K. Dick has ever wrote. I've forgotten a lot of it. I've probably forgotten as much as I remember. But this is one I've read multiple times every year, so I just read it, quick read. It's beautiful.
I think it's an excellent pick. And when I heard you say Philip K. Dick, my mind is immediately like, which one is he gonna choose? And I think that Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and Man in the High Castle steal a lot of the limelight when you have a discussion of Dick. So I'm very glad that you picked A Scanner Darkly. It's been far too long since I've read it. You've inspired me. I'm going to have to pick this one up again, give it a reread and a rewatch, because I haven't seen the movie since it came out.
Yeah.
Which was
Richard Linklater.
Yeah. Was it like late 90s, early 2000s?
2008, I think.
Was it that late?
This is 2006. It is, post Robert Downey Jr. breaking into people's houses and getting in trouble, pre-Iron Man, right? Like where Mel Gibson's loaning him money and really he's just sort of getting by, but in a role that was created for him. And Woody Harrelson's in it in a great part. Winona Ryder. And I love Keanu Reeves. I mean, he can't play every part, but
sure.
When the part is right,
when the part is right for him,
and that part with the Substance D, that little part when you do it in his voice, the pauses and everything, it's perfect. I love it.
Good choice.
Last pick from you.
All right, my last pick is On Writing by Stephen King. And if you don't know this book, you need to know it. If you don't care about Stephen King, I don't care. You need to know this book. And if you don't care about writing, I don't care. You need to know this book.
I was actually going to ask you, last episode we had a
Yes.
discussion about King.
Yes.
I was going to ask you, have you read On Writing?
I have.
And
Many
well, now I
times.
know because you brought it up.
Yeah. I think this is one of the most important books to be written in the modern age. And I don't say that lightly. It is the clearest window I've ever seen into a person's creative process. And it is distinctly King's creative process. He does not make any bones about, oh, well, if you do what I do, then you'll be a great... No, he's like, everybody's got to figure it out for themselves. And here's what works for me, and I'm going to give it to you in explicit detail, but it only works for me. It's not going to make you a writer. It's probably not even good advice for people who are not Stephen King. But he lays it all out, which I think is amazing. And after you go through this process of a book that's part memoir, part how-to guide, you walk away from it and you can say, okay, you know, fan or not, I can see how this is a man who's written 68 some odd novels in his lifetime. And I think that there's that you have to respect that, fan or not. For me personally, anytime I'm feeling creatively stuck, in any regard, whether that's in my employment, if I'm feeling creatively stuck there, if it's in hobbies or things that I want to do, I break this book out and I go through it again. And I've read it many, many times. But every single time I read it, it unlocks something new for me. Whether that's a new technique I want to try, or whether it just reignites the love of being creative in my mind. That's what it does for me. It functions fantastic as a book to sit and read. It functions fantastic as an audiobook because King himself reads the audiobook. And so even if you're not super into reading, I would highly recommend that. Definitely worth a pickup on Audible or wherever you get your audiobooks. But I have two excerpts from this. They're short and I'll just read them. But the first one is perhaps the greatest advice that any creative person can ever receive. And that is, amateurs sit and wait for inspiration. The rest of us just get up and go to work. And I mean, that's... I do not earn my living writing. I do earn my living in a creative field. And boy, talk about something that I need to hear probably every other day. That is a great piece of advice. And then the other thing that I think is kind of amazing coming from Stephen King, he says this: I've spent a good many years since, too many, I think, being ashamed about what I write. I think I was 40 before I realized that almost every writer of fiction or poetry who has ever published a line has been accused by someone of wasting his or her God-given talent. If you write or paint or dance or sculpt or sing, I suppose, someone will try to make you feel lousy about it. That's all.
So he said that by the time he was 40,
Yeah.
Give me some context here. What were his big works? When he was 39, he had written what?
The Stand?
Okay. Wow.
It?
Yeah. Yep. So just
The Shining?
successful beyond the
Yes.
measure of,
Yeah.
top 5 writers of all time already, right? And I'm not even a fan of
Sure.
King, but
Sure.
just even I can objectively recognize that he's skilled in a class of its own and success in a class of its own. And he wasn't sure if he was happy. Wow.
So in that same period of time, he has a very famous quote that he did on like the Dick Cavett show or 60 Minutes or something like that, where he
Big
said,
Dick Cavett fan, by the way. Aren't we all? By the way, for those who don't know who Dick Cavett is, if you've ever seen an old clip of a TV show, a host, and you're like, that's not Johnny Carson, I don't know who that is. That's probably Dick Cavett, right?
Is, absolutely.
And if it's not, you can just pretend and no one will know the difference.
Yeah. But anyway, King was on one of those talk shows, and he famously said, I feel like my books are the literary equivalent of a Big Mac and fries. Which is a horrible thing to say about yourself, as far as I'm concerned. But that stuck with him for a very long time. And I don't think anyone took King seriously in a literary sense until probably like the late 90s. And recording this podcast in 2023 and seeing the arc of King's career, that's kind of hard to believe. But for a very, very long time, he was a schlock horror writer, and that's it. And nobody gave him the credit that I think he is earned and is absolutely due. But on writing, like I said, whether you're a King fan or not, it has absolutely nothing to do with whether you should read this book, because I darn well think you should.
It has actually been on a list because I've always wanted to write, like, for real. I don't have the skill, but it would be nice to at least do something that I felt like was attempting the craft, right? Like, it's like, I don't know. I wish I could build stuff out of wood, right? So maybe I could, watch some YouTube videos. Somebody's really good at it. Maybe pick something up that I would use at some point later when I'm, doing something small. Maybe I could learn something from that I'm writing a work email. Like, I have a real clever twist at the end, and everyone dies in my email, and or what, right? But that it actually has been. We discussed last time. I've read one King book all the way through and made a few other attempts, not for me, but on writing is. I think is different, right? It's like a master class.
Yes. And again, I stress it's not because when King says this is how I write, I'm not saying everybody should do that. And King isn't saying everybody should do that. But just the advice that he gives, the way that he gives it, and especially the comment you just made, which is, I've always wanted to write, and could I pick something up from this? On Writing should be the next book you read. No
All
question.
right.
Now, I think you have one more.
I do. Interesting, the lack of overlap here. And I'm going to throw one. I 2 books. You read them both. Actually, quite surprised by The Sparrow, just because it's kind of an obscure little book. Not so surprised by Scanner Darkly. This one, though, not on your list. You have not read this one. Maybe you have, and I'll be shocked. I think, I'll preface this by saying, I think that humor in writing is extremely difficult, really difficult, to the point where it's even like almost embarrassing at times to read it, because I'm like, this is kind of uncomfortable because this isn't particularly funny. And especially I like visual stuff. I think that part of, I'm not just talking like, Benny Hill running around falling down in the music. I think there's something about the tempo of the joke and the delivery that, makes a joke funny. Where really hard to get through in writing, and maybe you get it in like a little bit in a book, but to make a whole book consistently funny, I've only read one that I can say achieves that, and it's by the funniest human who's ever lived, and that is a book called "Based on a True Story, Not a Memoir" by Norm Macdonald.
I have not read it.
All right.
I'm aware of the book, and I'm a huge Norm Macdonald fan.
Norm is the funniest guy ever. Ever seen him live?
Yeah, not in person, but I've seen like his specials and stuff like that.
I saw him live when he was here in our little town with Kevin Nealon.
I didn't even know that happened.
Yes, this was in like 2011, I believe. 2012, something like that. And this book was written in 2017. It is a brilliant telling of his life story where maybe 10% of it is true and 90% of it is the most absurd, insane things that piles absurdity on top of absurdity without any sort of like, there's no wink or a nod. It is told in the straightest manner possible. With the typical sort of Norm mystery, right? Even the people who know him, I once heard David Spade say something like he considered Norm one of his best friends, and he believed that he was one of Norm's best friends, and even he couldn't get a call back from him at times, just because he was Norm. He was floating around through life, but not in like an absent, disconnected sort of way. This was somebody who was hyper intelligent, but he was his own person. And he was difficult to know, and there was a mystery to him, and the mystery was part of the humor, and he'd go tell these incredibly long old man jokes that would be painfully unfunny from anyone but Norm Macdonald. But with him, it was a work of craftsmanship. The funniest person ever, right? He can deliver lines like a line like, "The more I hear about this Hitler fella, the less I like." Now, for most people, that's not only not funny, it's just highly offensive. When it comes from Norm, it's like, man, that is genius, stupid, all at once. He's the smartest dumb guy in the room, or the dumbest smart guy. Totally an act, because he was a brilliant, Mensa level, like brilliant. He just really smart, funny guy. His book, based on a true story, start to finish, absolutely hilarious. There's enough truth in it that it makes you wonder about what's real and what's not. There's enough little insights from the SNL days, but I'm pretty sure that he and Lorne Michaels didn't sit around and smoke morphine-dipped cigarettes while planning O.J. Simpson jokes that would ultimately get him fired. There's a little bit of truth in there. The O.J. Simpson jokes did get him fired.
Yeah.
But probably not the morphine stuff. That he was a gambler who had a problem with gambling, lost a significant amount of money. He did not owe millions of dollars to the mob and have to fake his own death. Those are the sort of things. It is brilliantly absurd. It is so funny and it's so well written and so well constructed that you wonder, did he write it? And by all accounts, there was no co-writer, no ghostwriter. Just a smart guy hammered it out. He was disappointed, I guess, that it actually got put in the biography section, because it was obviously not a biography. And in a moment of truth, he's like, guys, this is so clearly just joke and it's made up. Why are you putting it in the biography? It's confusing people. I want people to buy this for a laugh, not to learn more about this life, which is not the life that I've lived. I think it's hard to write. It's hard to be funny. It's hard to write funny. Norm makes it look effortless, and at the same time, it's like it's you could almost be tricked into believing that he actually was telling a true story.
That's fantastic.
And he almost had to put not a memoir. You almost wonder if he had to put that on there as a disclaimer so that people would know, wouldn't take it seriously.
That sounds amazing. And another book that is going immediately on my to-read list.
I love it.
That's phenomenal. Norm, man, when he died of cancer, so sudden, nobody knew. And I find that amazing. And the other thing I'll say about Norm, I don't know if you've seen this, on YouTube, there is some footage of him doing stand-up right as the pandemic is starting. Have you seen this?
Oh, I'm pretty sure that I have.
And I mean, we're talking like late February, early March 2000, and he goes after
like,
COVID.
I'm gonna leave right after here. Like, I got somewhere to go, or I can escape out the back. I think I remember this.
But it's so brave, and it's like nobody wants us to talk about this topic right now. We're all terrified. Nobody knows what's going to happen, and Norm just attacks it. And one of the best lines I've ever heard from him is he does this bit about COVID, and then he goes away from it, and he starts doing another bit, and in that other bit, he makes the comment. He's like, "Well, nobody knows how we're going to die." Well, we do now.
Yes. Yeah. And I just would like to believe that he did that bit once, never did it before, after, wasn't rehearsed. You had no idea. He could have done that bit 20 times, but in that, that weird period when the world was shutting down. But who knows? Because it felt so improvised and natural that I don't know. But oh my gosh, hilarious.
Yeah. And oh man. And like those 5-minute jokes, moth jokes that he would tell on Conan. Yes. I love it.
The light was on or something. This whole huge joke, and you're like, and that's and the I don't think Conan O'Brien's particularly funny. I think he's at his funniest when he's reacting to funny people, and no one's funnier than Norm. And I think no one got him laughing like Norm. My understanding, and I'm not, but I'm not an expert on comedy, but comedians thought that Norm was the funniest guy. Like when Dave Chappelle, regardless of whatever you think about Dave Chappelle, but when Dave Chappelle thinks that you're the funniest person he's ever dealt with, that's a high compliment, because to most people, Chappelle's one of the funniest ever. I love Dirty Work. I love that stupid movie. Never seen so many dead prostitutes and trucks.
I have.
Lord knows I had a guy in the back. It's dumb and it's funny, and Yeah, and the thing is that he was such a smart guy,
Yeah.
and that there's so much mystery around his life. His brother is a journalist for the CBC. This is a family of really intelligent people, foreign correspondent. I believe his name is Neil MacDonald, and no one knew what his life. He kept that a secret, and he did that for his art. He kept the cancer secret so that no one would look at him differently and feel any sort of pity or remorse, because that was part of what made him funny, was you didn't know how to feel about Norm. But if you felt bad because he might be sick, is he in pain, then that could change the way you took a joke, and he would not have wanted that. So wow, this is a great book. And I think the biggest impact to me is that it gave me a little bit of just more time with someone who I think is just brilliantly funny. But it is a hard thing to write a short story, to write a funny essay.
Yes.
To keep that up for a couple hundred pages.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, it takes a master.
It does. And yeah, I'm a big fan of Norm Macdonald's comedy and movies and short-lived TV shows that he had.
Many.
Yeah.
Dozens of TV. Like every year there's a new Norm Macdonald. A Minute with Stan Hooper. I don't know what that's about, but he had that on for a little bit. And
I vividly remember the one where he was like an ex-hockey player that had to do community service.
I think that's A Minute with Stan
Oh,
Hooper,
is that
maybe?
The Minute with Stan? Okay.
It might have been the Norm show. I don't know. You know, he had the sports show
Yeah.
with Norm Macdonald. He had a Netflix chat show. He had a web show where he would have guests on. You know, it didn't matter, right? If he had a show where he had a guest on, the guest was there to laugh at his jokes and to make Norm look funny.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter who they were. I mean, even Chevy Chase, which said that Norm was the only person other than him who did, Weekend Update funny. Chevy Chase giving someone a compliment, rare.
Yeah.
Chevy Chase giving someone a compliment that puts him on an equal footing with Chevy Chase is like almost unheard of, right? That's how much people thought of him. I think he's hilarious. Extremely sad that he's passed on. I understand that he was a Christian. I hope that wasn't a lark or a joke. I always, but I understand that he was. When I get to heaven, maybe I'll get a chance to meet him. I got to imagine he'll have cleaned up his act by then he won't be working blue in heaven. But funny guy.
Yeah, he was.
So I did say that I had a couple of like honorable mentions. 1984 was almost on that list, and then I was gonna say the other one, but I was afraid it might be on your list. But another one that I read shortly after 1984, another adult big boy novel, was Dune.
Ah, yeah.
And it's still actually a very good book. I think that the sequels get worse to the point where they're unreadable. Challenging book to read when you're 13, 14 years old, mostly because it's got a lot of interesting, strange concepts. The internal monologue mixed with the external action can be difficult to read. And it worked for Herbert. I wasn't sure if that'd be on your list, but that's an honorable mention.
Excellent book. I would not say particularly influential to me. If we were doing top sci-fi novels, it would have been much closer to a contender. Really good book, and it's such a heady book with so many different concepts, so many different ideas. But what's fascinating to me about the first one, and I completely agree with you on the sequels, but the first one, it's all there on the page. I mean, everything you need to comprehend what's happening, it's all there. And you might not catch you won't catch everything the first time you read it, but the fact that he realized such a complete world is shocking to me. And did it so well. Yeah, Dune is a great novel. I've read it a number of times.
Well, I wasn't sure if that'd make your list, so I was afraid I might spoil it, but yeah. Again, its impact on me was adult, big, made me feel like I was reading real work, and it also opened other sci-fi doors. I'm like, I can handle this, then I can make it through other stuff. So it was like it was a trainer for future readings. So
very true. Well, that was stirring discussion.
I learned some books I want to read. That's no overlap there.
No, I was surprised. I really thought, as I was preparing my list, I really thought you'd have 1984 on there. So I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you had some novels to balance and do differently, and that was great. And it all comes from a deep love of books. And I was having a conversation. I probably shouldn't say this. I was having a conversation at work a few days ago, and it just occurred to me that everyone in the circle of conversation has probably never read a book in their lives, and that terrified me. Like that thought. I think that if we are a society who reads, then we're a society that's going to be okay.
That is very interesting, and I think that the younger your crew that you work with or hang out with, it skews the more likely that they haven't read much becomes. But also then sometimes you're surprised and you talk to someone who's read all kinds of stuff and they make you feel like you're basically reading Dr. Seuss books compared to some of the stuff they're. And so that's when you start making up books that man, I love that. I'm going to go into a Norm bit when he talks about how much he likes Monet, and then he would run off to the bathroom to look Monet up and come back. Mostly I like his paintings. That it's kind of the way I feel when I talk books with some people, because
sure. Some people are like, well, of course you've read the dissertations of in
the original Russian only.
Yeah, I hope I'm not that snooty. But I love reading. It's one of my favorite hobbies, one of my favorite ways to pass the time.
I should do it more. When I went back to school, I will say, I went back to school and got my degrees because I didn't have degrees and I wanted to be able to continue to earn money. And I started to read a lot for school. I burned my part of my brain out. And I just didn't want to read as much for pleasure. And I've been getting more back into it recently. And how I've been doing that, I've read some new stuff, but I've been rereading old stuff that I liked, and kind of retraining myself. But I really got burned out because I viewed it like a chore, even if I wasn't enjoying it. I was still like I had to force myself to doing it, and so I've had to break that here recently. But yeah, now I want to read. I want to read on writing because I feel like that would be, I could unlock some things. One more question about that. I know we need to go, but one question. On writing, is it got like a narrative bent where you read it from start to finish, or could you pick it up, open it, and start to read something and get something out of it right there?
I would recommend you read it start to finish. Okay. It's not completely narrative, but it does have I'm building on things I told you before, kind of a thing to it. But and it's short. I mean, for King, it's like a 300-page book.
Okay.
So it's not going to take a lot of your time, and it's going to be well worth it.
All right. Well, that's going on the list.
All right.
Well, this was a lot of fun. Learned some stuff.
Another good episode. I will say for our listeners out there, if we've acquired any at this point, that our next episode is not going to be a list of 3 things from each of us.
We're going a different direction.
So it'll be a good conversation, but
R-rated. It's going to be filthy. No, nope. I could say that my sister is probably the only subscriber we'll have by that point.
And we just lost her.
She just unsubscribed.
Well, maybe we can win her back. But anyway, good discussion. Good to see you, Dave.
That was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And until the next episode, we're still trying to figure it out.
Amen. I'm glad I learned how to read.
It's a really important skill.
Yep.